Welcome back to another edition of Stand on Guard. Well, Trudeau has been caught in a major lie, and I'll be back in a minute to explain exactly what's going on here.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist.
Yeah, please do, like Sasha, my cat says, ring the bell, like the station, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, tell us you like us, and do so right now as you're watching this because we beat the YouTube algorithm when you do that. It really helps us out as a small independent station because I think I'm here to tell you the truth. That's what I try to do. And, we'd never advertise stuff that we can't deliver. I don't offer you clickbait and say, Trudeau's going to jail or Trudeau's going here. Trudeau did lie. That's the truth. That's not clickbait. This is true. Trudeau completely lied about who invited the former Waffen-SS, former Nazi, to the House of Commons to hear the Ukrainian President Zelensky's speech. He got a standing ovation, 2 standing ovations. Trudeau said it was all the speaker's fault, Anthony Rota at the time, who resigned over it. He took the fall. He fell on his sword. Trudeau said it was his fault, not mine. I had nothing to do with inviting this former member of the 14th Waffen-SS Grenadier Division, this former Nazi, whose unit was involved in war crimes in Poland. But we'll get into that a little later. What's significant, let's go back to the actual event. So here we are when the then Speaker, Anthony Rota, is introducing.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
There they are. Comic, tragic moment in time. Every MP in the House of Commons is on their feet applauding this former Nazi. And of course, they should have known if he was fighting the Russians. He was on the Nazi side. But I said at the time that this guy did not just get in there because the speaker invited him. He obviously came from a higher level. And this was posted on Facebook by the daughter-in-law of Yaroslav Hunka, Teresa Hunka, where she said he was waiting to meet Zelensky and Trudeau before the speech. So I said in my original report that this incident was authorized by the Prime Minister, and it was obvious. So yesterday, the report comes out. Justin Trudeau invited Nazi soldier official Zelensky reception. The PMO invited him. to this reception prior to the speech. Justin Trudeau was aware he was coming, and as we'll hear later, the PMO relied on the Ukrainian Canadian Congress for a list of nominees, but of course they vetted him. Yes, of course they did. Yeah. So there it is. There is the official invite from the Prime Minister's office. Now, do you recall how Prime Minister Trudeau responded after this event? He had the gall, as usual, to distract. He blamed the speaker. It's all the speaker's fault. But he also said the whole thing was just Russian disinformation. This was all designed to discredit Russia and to discredit the Ukrainians' fight in this great heroic war to save democracy, which of course it isn't. But we won't get into that at the moment.
His mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and by extension to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
Yes, distraction as usual. That's what Justin Trudeau does best. He distracts. And of course, we knew there was something fishy about this. We knew it just didn't add up. And he has been caught in the lie. The information is out there now, and it's quite fascinating. But what makes this even more fascinating is that there's a generational tie. Now, whether you believe that former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau was, in fact, Justin Trudeau's father, or you think his father was really Fidel Castro, there's a Trudeau link regardless. And Pierre Trudeau knew all about war criminals being in Canada. Now, this report, which was actually released by CBC, is quite fascinating because it talks about Pierre Trudeau as Justice Minister. This is before he became Prime Minister in 1967, offering his advice on whether or not an individual who is in Canada who had been tried in absentia for war crimes in Latvia during the Second World War should be deported. Now, Trudeau argues in his response, and this individual is only referred to as Subject F. Now, I'm not suggesting this individual is Yaroslav Hunka. That would be improbable because the individual who was tried in absentia would belong to a unit that was in Latvia. Hunka's Waffen-SS division was not in Latvia. But nonetheless, Trudeau was aware that hundreds, thousands of former Nazis, former Waffen-SS soldiers, had been brought to Canada after the Second World War, and they had lied or misled the authorities about their role during the Second World War. Many had engaged in war crimes. Many had engaged in the persecution of the Jews. Many were involved with the Holocaust. All of them in this group were Nazis, were members of the Waffen-SS or other paramilitary groups associated with Nazi Germany. And Trudeau was aware of it. And he advised that this individual not be deported, even though he argues it could not be established that Subject F knowingly concealed material circumstances relating to his good character, even if it be assumed that he was, in fact, guilty of the crimes for which he was convicted in absentia. So what does that mean? He didn't knowingly conceal his war crimes? This subject F didn't knowingly conceal his war crimes. He, forgot about it? He forgot about having innocent people murdered? He just didn't remember to mention that. It slipped his mind. Well, clearly this is a farce. And clearly Trudeau is saying there's so many of these people over here. If we deport this guy, we're going to have to deport thousands. And many of these people are Ukrainian Canadians who vote Liberal. So it became a political problem. And this is fascinating. I encourage you to read this. This is a CBC report from last Thursday. I couldn't believe the CBC ran this, but it is absolutely fascinating. Now, as I said, we don't know if Yaroslav Hunka was engaged in war crimes. We know his unit was. And after the revelation that 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka was being feted by the House of Commons, was receiving standing ovations from parliamentarians, Poland sought his extradition. And here it is in Politico a few days after that event. Very, very interesting. Now, this is no strange case because Ukrainian Nazi units have been eulogized, have been fed, have been praised throughout Canada. All we have to do is look at this footage here. And yes, there is ample evidence that Ukrainian Nazis were proud of their service with Nazi Germany and fought against the Russians. Now, why so many parliamentarians could not put two and two together at the Zelensky speech event at the House of Commons and say, hey, if this guy was fighting the Russians in the Second World War, he couldn't be on our side. He must have been on the side of the Germans because Russia was our ally in the Second World War. Historical fact. We were fighting with the Russians in the Second World War. And anybody who was fighting against the Russians was not fighting on our side. And we have too many parliamentarians who are historically ignorant about those facts. So let's watch a little more here, because this gets more and more fascinating.
Applauding a Ukrainian man who fought in a Nazi unit made international headlines and embarrassed the country. Now we're learning there's more to the story. Before he was recognized in the House, Yaroslav Hunka was personally invited by the Prime Minister to a private event. This event in Toronto, welcoming the Ukrainian president to Canada. Hunka didn't go, but this revelation calls into question who knew what, when, and why someone invited to an event by the Prime Minister wasn't vetted. At the time, Trudeau laid the blame on then-Speaker Anthony Rota, who resigned days later.
The Speaker was solely responsible for the invitation and recognition of this man and has wholly accepted that responsibility and stepped down. This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada.
The Prime Minister's office now says in a statement the Prime Minister had no knowledge of this individual before the independent recognition by the former Speaker of the House of Commons. The individual in question's name was submitted by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. This new information will force the Prime Minister to once again respond to an ugly incident that's already strained Canada's relationship with Ukraine. Russian propagandists use this incident to paint Ukrainians as Nazis. In an exclusive interview with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault, the First Lady of Ukraine underscored the seriousness.
It's bad that we conducted our research afterward, and not the people who had invited him to the parliament.
So, Kate, a lot of people were at that event. I got an invitation. I went hoping maybe this is a chance to secure an interview with the Ukrainian president. That did not happen, by the way. Do we know how it is organizers decided who was invited?
Well, the Prime Minister's office says more than 1,000 people were invited, and hundreds of Canadians were invited upon the recommendation of groups like the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. We reached out to that group to get their reaction and received no response. But one former chief of protocol said all invitees to an event hosted by the Prime Minister should have received some level of vetting. And in a statement, the Conservative leader's office said Trudeau misled the Canadian people and is blaming everyone except himself.
Well, isn't that something? Adrienne Arsenault is an old friend of mine. When I was in the military, I used to often have Adrienne at my base in Comox. She did some great coverage of the military, great coverage of the Air Force, and she's doing some great work now. Now, I'm the first one to say defund the CBC, but when the CBC gets it right, I'm the first one to say good job. And that's one of the reasons I think they can be defunded from government money, because they have good reporters on staff like Adrienne Arsenault, who does a good job, does a great job at times. And I really like the report she's done here. And this needs to be known. If the CBC, the state media, is calling Justin Trudeau a liar, then there's something wrong here. Now, where is Justin Trudeau in all this now? Is he owning up to it? Is he saying, yes, I lied? Yes, I put the blame on Anthony Rota, the speaker. I made it look like it was entirely his fault. Everybody else walked away blameless. And I even added that bit about Russian disinformation just to make it look that much better, that much more of a distraction. But no, Justin Trudeau never admits he lies, and he lies chronically. He's constantly bending the truth. He's chronically prevaricating. He is the most mendacious prime minister we have ever had in office. And he's a national and international embarrassment. He is a clown, like Zelensky, an international clown. I'm not going to get into why we are spending billions of dollars on a corrupt President Zelensky and a corrupt government in Ukraine when it's going to lose this war imminently. The issue here is why Justin Trudeau invited a Nazi to the House of Commons to receive 2 standing ovations. And because why is Chrystia Freeland unapologetic in her support of extremist units in Ukraine? Why has she never come to terms with her grandfather being a Nazi propagandist? Why do we never hear about that? Why does she support the Azov battalion in Ukraine, which is a neo-Nazi unit? Why is she never challenged for her stand? Why does she walk around with a Ukrainian pin on her clothing when she's being interviewed in the House of Commons during question period? Why does she get away with this? Did Trudeau own up to it today in the House of Commons in question period? Thank God the question came up. Let's watch what happened.
He's hiked the cost, he's hiked the crime, he's not worth the cost, and he's not worth the crime after 8 years. He's also not worth the hypocrisy. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been claiming for months that he had no involvement in or knowledge of the invitation of a former Nazi soldier to the visit of the Ukrainian president. Now we know that he personally invited that same individual. He actually said the opposite. And he said that the former speaker had to resign over doing the exact same thing. So will he hold himself to the very same standard and admit that he's not fit for office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The attacks that the leader of the opposition is choosing to make against the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress demonstrates the extent to which this Conservative Party no longer stands with Ukraine. They have an opportunity.
Did you hear Pierre Poilievre make any attack on the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress? Look at this. Look at this hypocrite. this swindler, this liar. Make it up as he goes along. Distract after distraction.
Just a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to stand and vote in favor of a free trade deal that Volodymyr Zelensky himself is asking this House to pass, and he is choosing to not stand with Ukraine, not stand with Ukrainians, and not stand with Ukrainian Canadians. Why are they abandoning?
So this absolute imbecile pretends this is about a vote on free trade and not whether or not he lied about inviting a Nazi to the House of Commons? How does he get away with this?
Ukraine!
And look at those trained skills. Stand up for the arrogant pest down.
Order. Outrage and apologies on behalf of everyone else. A new report by the Globe and Mail shows that the Prime Minister's office invited a Nazi to his diplomatic reception in Toronto. He blamed the Speaker, saying that he acted alone. He's saying he had no idea about any of it. He called for him to take responsibility. He watched him resign, and yesterday he tried to blame the Ukrainian Congress. After all of the embarrassment all over the world, why is he above the rules that he applies to everyone else?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is some name that came from a community organization. Obviously, the Prime Minister had no knowledge of this, but here we know what is happening over here. We are voting today at third reading on the Canada-Ukraine free trade arrangements. Mr. Zelensky stood there and asked us to pass this. Their opposition to this bill is a moral failing of historic proportions in response to an effort to support our friends in Ukraine and repel the Russian invaders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was a shameful answer from that member, Mr. Speaker. Another day, another international embarrassment. After months of denials and throwing the former Speaker under the bus, now we learn that it was the Prime Minister who invited a Nazi to a reception with President Zelensky. He forced the Speaker to resign, to take the fall, so he could avoid responsibility and cling to power. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he is not worth the cost to Canada's reputation. Why did the Prime Minister invite a Nazi to a reception with the Ukrainian Prime Minister?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The community event was held with the President of Ukraine, to which over 1,000...
It's worth noting that the government House Leader McKinnon is up again talking about this issue because Trudeau fled the House after he responded to Poilievre's question, after he basically distracted, after he said it's all about a vote on free trade. Don't ask me any questions. Don't point the finger at me. Don't suggest I'm the liar. Don't suggest I'm the problem. Trudeau fled the House because he can't stand scrutiny. He can't stand being faced with the raw data. He can't stand the facts, so he fled the House, left his House Leader holding the bag for the rest of the afternoon.
1,000 people were invited. In fact, some conservatives were invited to that, Mr. Speaker. But we're not talking about any of that today because they care about this. They're pretending to care about this. This is fake outrage. Why? Because today we are voting on trade arrangements with one of our closest allies, the people in the country of Ukraine who are repelling as we speak and dying against Russian invaders. This is a moral failing of historic proportions, Mr. Speaker.
All nonsense. So to go back over this, Trudeau lied. We've seen the evidence. Trudeau lied. Let us remember that. The Liberals have been lying about this for years. And that is a fact. Pierre Trudeau gave advice in 1967 that a convicted Nazi war criminal who was tried in absentia, who got into Canada because he lied about his Nazi past, should not be deported because it would mean a lot of other people could be deported, including a lot of other Liberal supporters, Liberal voters. A lot of these Nazi war criminals who came across were from Ukrainian descent because a lot of Ukrainians served with the Nazis and were anti-Semitic. That's a fact of life. I am of Ukrainian lineage myself, but I'm not afraid to face the truth. There was a lot of ugliness in Ukraine during the Second World War. A lot of people who hated Joe Stalin and who hated communism thought they'd get a better deal from Adolf Hitler and Nazism, and were prepared to participate in Nazi war crimes, and were prepared to participate in the Holocaust because of that. That was a very bad trade-off. And during the Brian Mulroney years, there was something called the Shane Commission. There was a commission of inquiry on war criminals. Now, that report has never been made entirely public without redactions. And this latest revelation that Pierre Trudeau made comments and gave advice about not deporting a Nazi war criminal in 1967 came at the request of B'nai B'rith for more revelations, for more redactions to be removed. And as the comment made from B'nai B'rith indicates, Pierre Trudeau was talking politically. He understood. He understood exactly what he was saying. And this is the comment from B'nai B'rith. It's hardly surprising that, as the Minister of Justice, Trudeau wasn't just thinking legally, he was thinking politically, said David Morass, Senior Legal Counsel for B'nai B'rith. And so it goes today. Last week in the House of Commons, Justin Trudeau warned Pierre Poilievre that he'd better stand with Ukraine, keep giving them billions of dollars, keep giving them the weapons they want, because if he doesn't, he's going to face political consequences, electoral consequences from Ukrainian Canadians who won't like it. They'll keep voting Liberal. They won't vote Conservative because it's a political issue. It's got nothing to do with Ukraine standing for democracy. Ukraine is a corrupt state. Zelensky's a corrupt leader. He's an international clown who is extorting money from democratic nations around the world on the fabricated premise that he is waging a war for democracy. That's less true now than it was during the First World War, being a war for democracy or a war to end all wars. It's all fraudulent. And what's even more fraudulent is Justin Trudeau. He's not a leader. He's a phony prime minister. He is a clown. He's a crank. And he's a liar who invited a Nazi to the House of Commons and won't admit he did it because he was found out. Because it was a pretty stupid lie. And it was a pretty stupid thing to do because it didn't take much to find out who Yaroslav Hunka really was. That this was a guy who fought with the Waffen-SS against the Russians, who were our allies, and for the Germans, who we were fighting at the time. Justin Trudeau is not a very smart liar, but he certainly is a chronic one. And these lies have got to stop. Just like he's not facing any consequences right now, any legal consequences for invoking the Emergencies Act, even though a federal court judge, Robert Mosley, said that was unconstitutional, that was unjustified, and that was unreasonable. He must face electoral consequences for that decision too, just like he must face electoral consequences for inviting a Nazi to the House of Commons and then forcing other people to carry the water for him, to hold the bag, to fall on their political sword for him. It's time he fell on his political sword. Thanks for watching today. This is indeed another sad day for Canada and another day to remember that Justin Trudeau is not fighting for you. He's not rolling up his sleeves for Canadians. He's continuing to fight for Justin Trudeau and his own power. And he doesn't care about Canadians. And he never cares about the truth. The truth is always the first casualty when Justin Trudeau opens his mouth. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow.